I am so glad that I listened to that still small voice inside. We were living in northwest China during the SARS epidemic, and everyone everywhere was forced to wear masks. There was temperature checkpoints, and if you were found that you had a temperature, you were a public health risk and you were taken into quarantine. So you can understand my worry when my son came up to me and said that his legs hurt him and he had purple spots all over it and he had a temperature. I didn't dare take him to a local doctor or else he'd be put in quarantine. So I called an expat doctor in another city who suspected he had a rare autoimmune disorder called HSP. And he said I needed medical care right away for him because it had a complication that he could go into kidney failure. So I contacted the embassy, and they couldn't do a whole lot for me other than provide a letter that I could show that asked for safe passage to the expat hospital near the U.S. consulate in Hong Kong where we wanted to go. So I have the letter, and a really nice expat friend offered to accompany us, and we headed to the airport. A backpack on my back. I was carrying my son, whose fever got so high he had passed out. I loaded him up with Tylenol and ibuprofen just before getting to the airport so that his temperature would be brought down as much as possible. When we arrived at the airport, I first got that still small voice. We went up to the first checkpoint just to get into the building, and a word that I had learned in Chinese just came to me. And it was the perfect word. It was retard. I went up there, and as they were asking me about my son, who obviously looked very sick, I said, "Please don't embarrass me. My son is retarded." 这人是. And at that, they backed off. They didn't want to cause a scene. It's like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Please go in." So I was able to, between the Tylenol and ibuprofen, pass him through the checks and telling him that he was retarded, we got on the airplane, which was a 5-hour ride. Halfway through the ride, as we were sleeping, we got awoken because flight attendants were going person to person with glass thermometers checking temperatures in flight. I thought, oh my goodness, what would they do if they found somebody? Radio the tower? I don't know. And it worried me because I knew my son had a temperature and I wasn't going to give him more Tylenol until just before we landed. Again, that voice told me what to say. She came to us with the thermometer, and he was asleep, and I told her that he was afraid of strangers, and if she woke him, he would have a fa pi chi, which is a temper tantrum. She did not want to make a scene again. That worked. So she handed me the thermometer, which I put under his shirt and held the bulb between my fingers as I held it by his armpit, and when she came back, the thermometer showed normal. We managed to get through that. We landed. I had his Tylenol and ibuprofen in him. He passed all those checkpoints, and I started hiking from the airport to the border. By the time we got to the border, my son passed his temperature check, but I did not. I had gotten so overheated from jogging. So they made us stand aside while the authorities were summoned. And while waiting there, my sweaty body chilled, and I asked them to recheck me, and I was below normal. So I talked them into letting us go. We crossed the border, and as I approached hiking over to the train station and got in line to have my temperature check there, a security guard was watching us. And when we got up and my son's temperature was checked, his fever was showing. The security guard came over and talked to me, and at that point, the voice reminded me I had this embassy letter. So I pulled out the embassy letter and handed it to him. And he walked away and came back with some officials. And I thought, oh, great. Well, at least we're in a city where there's a consulate, and if we're in quarantine, we can get help. They gave me the letter back, told me to follow them out to the security guard outside, security car, and had me get in, and told the driver to please make sure I safely arrived to the expat hospital near the U.S. consulate. So I got escort all the way to the hospital. My son did have HSP. He was admitted for 4 days, and when he got out, he was fine.